Okay, well thanks everybody for sticking around for the Q&A, and I hope you enjoyed the film. Just going to check, okay, everyone can hear me? Just final time, okay, public speaking. I think it's a really timely moment for us to be having this conversation. What's going on in the UK, in the asylum system, for those of us that care about human rights, advancing and protecting the rights of displaced people. Well, at the moment, the current government is trying to get through their Rwanda deportation scheme, despite it being deemed illegal by the Supreme Court. They seem absolutely hell-bent on getting that through Parliament. In parallel to that, there's the outsourcing of the accommodation for asylum seekers, which many of you may know is already an incredibly precarious situation. They're reducing the amount of time that people can stay in hotels. And also what's happening now is they're trying to outsource the entire issue to barges, which many of you will have heard of, which I think a lot of people can safely consider floating prisons where conditions are very, very precarious and dangerous. And unfortunately, this evening, a vigil is being held in commemoration of somebody who lost their life on the Bibi Stockholm, which is the barge that they're currently housing people on. And what's happening across the border in Calais, while conditions continue to be basically very dangerous, although the film was made a couple of years ago, which we'll talk about, conditions are still very, very tough, and unfortunately, 7 people have lost their lives in a little over a month. Almost all in trying to cross the UK. So that's the context of where we're having this conversation. I think it's a really good time to be having it. Joining me to discuss Calais, the film, the UK asylum system, we have, to my left, Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes!
Jeremy is the MP for Islington North and has visited Calais several times, I know already at least a couple of times this year, to see the work of grassroots organisations there and to see firsthand the plight of displaced people and the conditions that people are living in. To Jeremy's left, we have the director of On Our Doorstep, Tom Laurance. I think everyone knows who Tom is now, but Tom's the film director who obviously spent quite a lot of time in Calais. To Tom's left, we have Ellen Rafiqi, who works at Refugee Community Kitchen, which is a grassroots organisation, part of the Calais Appeal, which has been serving hot food with dignity in Calais, and they also have operations in London since 2015. And to Ellen's left, we have Gulwali Passarlay, activist, author of The Lightless Sky. Present. Kindly. The book will kindly be on sale. I think Gulwali would be happy to sign you a copy, and it speaks about his experience as a child refugee passing through Europe, including through Calais. So that's the panel that we have. I'm going to ask a couple of opening questions, and then I'm going to hand over to all of you. If you'd like to bring your questions to the fore, you're welcome. I think we'll go, maybe not in totally chronological order, depending on where people are next to me, but maybe given we just watched the film, we could start with a question for Tom. It comes up a little in the film, Tom, but can you talk us through what inspired you to make this movie, and whether you knew these were the types of stories you wanted to capture when you first arrived in Calais?
I think I'm on now.
No? Yes, I'm on now. Well, initially I went to Calais as a volunteer. I was a carpenter, and I was following a call out on Facebook in winter 2015, and they just needed people to build rudimentary shelters out there. So I had made films before, but I didn't have any intention to film. And as soon as I arrived, the situation was so desperate, and I was the skills that I had were quite useful in terms of carpentry, and it just didn't seem appropriate to be filming. So it took And I was only planning on staying for a week, but I stayed a bit longer, and then I met Liz, and Liz is really someone that when you're in her orbit, you just want to, she seems to be someone with her head on straight, like the adult in the room that knows what needs to be done, and she's very experienced and very inspiring. And so after I met Liz, I decided to stay a bit longer, and then I kept saying 2 more weeks for about 4 months, and then I just ended up like staying full, till the end. And so it wasn't till about 6 months into my time there that we built a lot of shelters by then, and the weather was getting a bit warmer, so it wasn't so dire, the need. It wasn't like raining in February, and people heard that I was a filmmaker and I had that skill set, and so other volunteers and people I met in the camp kind of encouraged me to start filming from the inside of this experience, because there were a lot of filmmakers, camera crews, news crews that came to Calais, but they'd usually have a set agenda that they already had before they'd arrived, and they'd spend maybe a weekend. They wouldn't really spend time to really understand the situation and all its complexities. So there was a lot of skepticism around cameras, and that's kind of why I didn't want to film for so long. But I started, I was always just really moved and inspired by the ordinary civilians that went down out of the kindness of their hearts and just wanted to do something and just muck in and kind of just oppose their government, who they didn't agree with. And I just found that really moving. It was an incredible phenomenon, like thousands of people. That winter in particular, 2015-16, there were hundreds of people every day, and from all walks of life and different ages. And I was very lucky to be footloose. I didn't really have anything tying me down. I didn't have a family or a full-time job or anything. And I had the leisure and time to stay for such a long time. But I was in awe of some people that had full-time jobs, and they took the weekend to drive down to Calais and volunteer for what ultimately was about 24 hours. They volunteered, and then they had to go home, back to work, and people with families, and it was absolutely incredible. So I was always quite, interested in making a film about the volunteer movement, but obviously you can't make a film just about the volunteer movement. So,
thank you very much. I think filmmaking is no easy task, and I think it's very admirable that you took the time to do it, and also took a lot of deep time to be in the space and to get to know people, and for people to be comfortable with cameras, as you say, because filmmaking in these environments isn't easy. And as you allude to, a lot of the representation comes from media, a lot of which comes there for a short amount of time, and it can be very difficult to tell those stories properly. I wanted to turn to Gulwali to ask a kind of related question. Gulwali, I know that you spent time in Calais, and I know that you've watched this film a few times. I wonder if you'd be willing to share a bit about what the film made you reflect on about your time in Calais, and whatever you're willing to share about, indeed, your journey in Europe.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, and thank you for being here. I think the film is very important and timely. Although it was made a few years ago, it's still that you hear people say, oh, if these are genuine refugees, why they're coming here? France is a safe country. You hear all sorts of things people say without actually understanding the context and understanding what is happening there. So when I was in Calais back in 2007, October, November, I was there for a month, but until I wrote the book 8 years later, I always thought to myself I was there for 3 months. It never occurred to me that I was there for a month until I worked it out backwards, that I realized the place was so bad. It was such a miserable place. We used to run after lorries every night. The lorry drivers will kick us out, or the police will kick us out almost on a daily basis. Sometimes we'll try it a few times a night. We'd walk for like 3-4 hours to the car parks near the motorway. We lived in this shanty town, this kind of built our own tents. The police would wake us up every morning. We used to get harassed and arrested on a daily basis. Our shoes will be taken away, our blankets sometimes burned, our tents burned, and I'm seeing similar images. So the film brought a lot of memories. I watched it a few times, and it really, because at the time when I was there, it was like 500 to maybe 800 people at times. And in the beginning, when I arrived to Calais, after spending about 10 months, 11 months on the journey at the age of 12, I was one of the youngest usually in the place. And the thing was very frustrating for me is that nobody was getting across. For the first few days when I was there, we used to meet. There were charities who were giving us food in the evening. There were charities giving us food during the day near the train station. Every time we see the same people, and more people will come. So there's like, nobody's getting across. So it was kind of a hopeless situation. So yeah, it's the thing that really bothers me now after 16 years of being in Britain is that things has got worse, not better, particularly when it comes to us spending, 250 million or more, and the securitization of Calais, and people are not coming on small boats because they like to. I mean, getting across lorries and trucks are dangerous. I came at the back of a refrigerator truck on my 100th attempt. Wow. The smuggler came one night. We were running from the police. It was muddy. It was raining. I was just sick and tired of this place. I was so close. I was so far. My brother was supposedly here. I mean, this idea that I would have stayed anywhere if they have welcomed me. Until then, the only place that welcomed me was Italy. And I would have certainly stayed in Italy. And I think things have changed a lot for Italy since I was there. But anyhow, so I was hoping to be reunited with my brother. Yes, in theory, there should have been a safe passage for me because I had a brother here. I should have been able to come. But the UK has been very good when we were part of the Dublin regulation, when we were part of the EU asylum mechanism where if you have family members, you could be transferred legally and safely. The UK was very good at playing it the other way around. So if people were here who were fingerprinted in the EU, you will be strictly returned, but it was not the other way. Nobody ever told me that I could come here when I told them that I had a brother here. Anyways, so I came in the back of a refrigerator truck. The smuggler came and he had bananas in his hand, and he said, "Who was going?" This was the first time the smuggler ever asked me for my opinions or if I have options, and we knew this was dangerous. And I stood up, I was like, I'm tired of this place. I knew it was dangerous, but I didn't know the extent of danger. I was just hopeful. There was something in me, a sense of faith and hope that I came this far. I'm hopefully going to make it this far. But we go into the back of this refrigerator truck, very similar to the one we saw 39 Vietnamese people lost their lives in a few years ago. Had the driver put on the freezer, the story would have been very different. So we were very, very lucky that he didn't. So basically, the journeys were hard before, but now the small boats, it's happening as a result of Brexit, because of more checks, and as a result of securitization in Calais, and as a result of us pouring millions and millions to harass refugees. So unless we give people alternative ways, I say this a lot, and I was in Poland last year, and this year I was in Chisinau in Moldova. The Ukrainian women and children, they don't take in the small boats because they have safe passage. They're able to come here through legal means. That is not available to anybody else. Even the Afghan resettlement scheme, I think like 22 people or something came through it last year, and the year before like 4 people. This year they're like, it's crazy, it doesn't work. I mean, it just exists in name only. There are Afghans still stranded in hotels. And so, I mean, I could go on and on, but like my experience and journey had taught me that what happened to me happened to me. I'm kind of over it in some ways, but now just speaking to a gentleman earlier, Martin, about how my uncles actually traveled from Vienna to Slovenia. Two of our relatives have lost, two of our relatives, a young man, they've been missing since end of October, and the family really desperate to find out. And he went to Slovenia trying to find out, and the police and the authorities have not been very cooperative. He went to Croatia, and it seems like they have drowned in the river between Croatia and Slovenia. And the authorities telling my uncle it's best that you don't take these bodies back to Afghanistan, although it costs a lot of money, but also it's like they're unrecognizable. Like, what is the point? So we live in a very strange world where people are drowning and dying, and we don't even know about them. And so there's just so many stories of Afghans, particularly in Bulgaria, and Bosnia, and Serbia, and Croatia, and Slovenia, and other places, in Hungary, in Greece. There's literally graveyards in Turkey, in Van, the city near the Iranian border. There's so many. There's a documentary I watched, literally hundreds and hundreds of unnamed graveyards of young, you could tell that they're young boys. And so, yeah, it's heartbreaking what has happened. I think the UK spent far too much time and energy. Look, this government is so stubborn. They're passing emergency legislation to send a few hundred people to Rwanda, like the cruelty of this, and this idea that Rwanda is a deterrent, and then they're arguing this is a wonderful place, why are people going to it? Like, you can't have it both ways. Either it's a wonderful place or it's a terrible idea. And this idea for me, although we won the legal ruling that Rwanda was unsafe, for me the question is not whether Rwanda is safe. The question, are we unsafe to be sending people to Rwanda or to another country? Are we in a position to be so much cruel and immoral to actually send people because we deem them unwanted? So people like me are seen as undesirable and unwanted, and I'm seen as a threat, and I need to be sent 6,000 miles away. And the thing that really upsets me is that, you know, we have a gentleman here, he could have been a prime minister.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
could have brought things so much right, and then
Yes.
literally we lost them, we missed out on such an opportunity. But thank you, Jeremy, for all that you do, and you know, for supporting and showing solidarity. I think the political class in this country, they scapegoat refugees for their problems. I'm not the problem. Like, the MPs were speaking in Parliament, oh, there's waiting list, there's this and that because people don't speak English, or they just come up with so much nonsense and rubbish. Like, the actual fact is, like, if there's no social housing, if there's lack of doctor appointments, or there's school placements, or whatever, it's not the fault of refugees. We get a few hundred refugees compared to other countries, you know.
Yeah.
France takes 100,000 more, and Germany takes like 7 times more. We could do more. We need to be doing our fair share. We welcome more people from Hong Kong and Ukraine in the last few years than we have done for 20 years when it comes to refugees. This can be done. And I'm sorry, I've answered a different question, but it's just like, it's so frustrating that we spend so much energy. This government is so stubborn and so hard-headed with, like, they go in on the path, they're happy to break international law, they're happy to call people, you know, dehumanize people and demoralize them and imprison people for coming here without a passport or so-called illegal entry. You know, just like, we're going on a very dangerous path, and I feel like we're heading in a, you know, they will blame, this whole election coming up, they will just blame, they will make it all a refugee or migrant issue. And yeah, I'm just sad people will still actually buy into this argument. There are some people in this country who will buy into the narratives of the conservatives and the Tories, that I'm the problem and people like me are the problem. Although now I'm a citizen, I still see myself as a displaced person. It took me 7 years to become a refugee. It took me 12, 11 years to become a settled person. It took me 14 years to become a refugee. And I went back to Afghanistan to see my mother after 16 years last year. And I was actually afraid of the Taliban, but more so, I thought if I come back to Dubai, I'll find out my passport has been revoked. So I was more afraid of the UK government revoking my passport, because I don't feel like a normal citizen. I definitely feel like a second-class citizen, because with this government, to be honest, I don't really trust them. So I'm careful what I say, but you know, we live in a very dangerous time. So yeah, and we need to be worried about it.
Thank you very much for being willing to share your story. I mean, they're hard facts, but we can't shy away from them. In Calais, where a lot of people in this room have been and worked, the cemetery attached to the mosque is running out of space because of the amount of deaths that there are people trying to cross the border. I mean, the idea of Europe as a graveyard is one that we have to take very seriously. And if I'm not wrong, the 250 million that you were referring to is probably from the bilateral agreement in March between the UK and France. 250 million is the latest amount that we've promised to France for securitizing the border. That's not for introducing safe routes, that's for barbed wire, fences, drones. That's our money and that's where it's going. To talk a little bit more about Calais, Ellen, if I could turn to you. I wanted to ask if you could tell us a bit about the founding mission of Refugee Community Kitchen, why it started, and for those that don't really know what happens in Calais, what other services are available, why it's important to do the work that you guys do.
Sure. So RCK was basically founded by 4 mates, who were all mates from the 90s rave scene. And they got together basically wanting to, as many other people, wanting to do something about it. They'd heard about the situation in Calais, one of them had been over, and the skill set within the group of them was cooking, chefing, production management, activism, and they just went over and Maya, who's in the film, was basically like, oh, well, there's this manky space over in the warehouse that they just moved in, and it was like basically it was like the junkyard is where everything kind of got dumped, and they were like, you can have it if you want. They were like, great. And they set it up, and a big part of the founding mission was actually making food that wasn't just you need X amount of carbohydrates or X amount of protein or whatever. It's really food that was nutritious, really tasty, hot, absolutely anybody could access it, culturally familiar, all these things that are really important, and that food has more of food means so much more than just kind of like, oh, this is what you get, this is what you're grateful for. We all have that memory around food, and it's so important in so many cultures, and that was what we wanted people to actually have. We wanted them to feel respected, we wanted to feel that, you know, that they were dignified. I mean, the RTK condiments table was, I mean, it got ridiculous at some points, but it's a really big part of people having a choice over what their food and what they get to eat. And that's really a huge part of what we do. And we're still going today. I mean, I think the first service was 500 portions, and, you know, at some points, I mean, during the eviction, we were doing 2,000 meals 3 times a day for the kids that were still left at the camp. So, you know, it's a real mission. But yeah, we're still very much there. And the other organisations, actually, maybe you might be able to talk more about the other organisations, but a lot of them are in very similar vein of wanting not just to provide aid, but to provide solidarity and actual kind of support to people.
Great. Thank you very much. Turning now to Jeremy to ask you a question a little bit closer to the UK, moving away from Calais. As I was saying in the introduction, we have this current government trying to get through what I'm going to call the illegal Rwanda deportation scheme. Not my words, Supreme Court's words. We have Bibi Stockholm, we have the outsourcing of asylum accommodation, we have the asylum backlog, which is unbelievably long. We heard about how the time it can take for people to get their asylum status approved. Is it a fair statement to say that the asylum system in the UK is broken?
I think it is, yes. Just before I reply to that, I just want to say a huge thank you to the film and what it showed us. And if I may make a suggestion to continue with the film theme, what would be very powerful would be background shots of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places, and the people in Calais, not all, but for the most part, are fleeing from wars themselves, human rights abuse, environmental disasters. And in my experience on visiting, talking to people there, they've just been through the most horrendous experiences possible in their lives, clearly very disturbed by them. And then the British media say they're a sort of enemy landing at the gate and it's all their fault that the government has been underfunding the health service and education service. I mean, it's at a logical level, it's all completely crazy. But then you look at the way the rhetoric is mounted against asylum seekers. They are the latest very convenient scapegoat for the failure of governments to pick up anything since austerity of 2008. And so, as living standards fall, as public services are underfunded, they need somebody to blame, so they're very happy to blame asylum seekers for it and claiming that they're the cause of all the problems. It is utter nonsense. When granted rights of residence and right to work and so on, those that have made their homes in this country are less likely to be claiming the benefits they're entitled to than anybody else, more likely to be working than anybody else, more likely to be doing 2 or 3 jobs than anybody else, and actually keeping the education service, the transport service, and so many other services going. We just need to grow up and recognise that migration into this country has sustained the economic process of this country and continues to do so. So this decision to deliberately impoverish people who seek asylum, make them try and survive on less than £1.50 a day, and effectively put them into almost detention centres, or almost completely those. It doesn't happen in other countries. Then add to that the idea that we will offshore our asylum process in the same way that Australia has done, by sending people to Rwanda, and they've been preceded by now £240 million has been given to the government of Rwanda as a bribe to get them to agree to this process. The Supreme Court has ruled it out of order. The government then produced one piece of illegal legislation, which was the first time ever in my time in Parliament since the introduction of the Human Rights Act, the Secretary of State could not sign a statement that is required on the front of every piece of legislation to say it's compliant with the Human Rights Act. They couldn't, because it's not. And now another piece of legislation is trying to push through to do the same. And so we're trying to evade our responsibilities under the European Convention on Human Rights, evade responsibilities of the European Court of Human Rights. Now, I'm a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Our job is, if you like, custodians of the Convention of Human Rights, and we elect judges to the Court of Human Rights. And there's kind of like a parallel universe there. I'm not saying they're all particularly progressive left-wing people in the Council of Europe. They're not. But they're sort of aghast at the idea that this country would be the first to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. And it's now being followed on by others trying to do the same thing. In the meantime, we have barbed wire all over Europe. We have surveillance cameras all over Europe. We have an underclass created by this asylum system, missing children and everything else. And then in this country, we have the horrors of the detention system and the impoverishment that goes with it. Is the system broken? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it's broken. So what's the answer? First, recognize why people seek asylum and our responsibility in that. We spent billions going to war in Afghanistan. We're apparently unable to provide anything to support the people who are the victims of that war in Afghanistan. Ditto Iraq, ditto Libya, ditto Syria. And then provide safe routes for people so they can claim asylum in a logical way. Now, the Ukrainian war is appalling, wrong. I want it stopped. I want a ceasefire. I want some kind of process that brings about peace and justice for the people both of Ukraine and of Russia. Same with Gaza. And yet we were able to provide a very effective, very efficient way for Ukrainian refugees to arrive in Britain, be given accommodation, the right to work and access to the NHS. If you can do it for Ukrainians, why can't you do it for victims of the war in Yemen or anywhere else? And so I just think there is a question of the politics of it, and I must say I'm frequently disgusted by the language that I hear in Parliament, and some of the language I pick up from very right-wing people in the Council of Europe, though I have to say they're not as frequent as the right-wing people in the British House of Commons, but they're catching up. So it is about our sense of consciousness and self-worth. Now, I'll finish this, I know I'm going too long. What are future generations in history going to say about the treatment of refugees into Europe and into the United States in the early part of the 21st century? The sheer brutality of the treatment of people who are victims of all kinds of awful things. History is going to be very unkind on those politicians that just rode what they believe to be a populist wave of demonizing people who themselves are victims. They should start looking to themselves and looking to some way forward which is based on humanity and based on the conventions we've already got.
Thank you very much for that, I think, quite comprehensive overview of how things are...
too long, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're not going to hear from me anymore. I'm going to open up for questions, and I think, depending on how many there are, I'll probably take maybe a couple at once. So yeah, if you're happy to raise your hand. Yeah, maybe a microphone would be great, actually. Thanks, and then we'll share one between us. So I think we've got somebody in this second. So yeah.
Thank you for a remarkable movie. I don't know whether this is working. But
There might be a button at the bottom of it.
I give up my mic so not to be scapegoated or blamed for the immigrants taking the mics.
hello. Yes. Thank you for a remarkable movie. I went to Calais with my son in February 2016. He played cricket with a couple of Afghan boys, and what was remarkable was that they were just the same. The only difference was they had different passports or no passports. My question is for Jeremy. Rishi Sunak has made stop the boats as a primary focus of his campaign. Do you think that would work? And more importantly, how do we make sure that it does not work for him in the next election?
Thank you very much. As I say, I'll maybe take another at a time. Yep, we've got one here, person in a reddish jumper. I think a mic's just coming around.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Tom. Like, very nostalgic to see images from Calais. I guess my question is also for Corbyn. I was just trying to think of something quite practical that maybe we could take away. I run an organisation that works with young displaced people in London. And yeah, we are constantly campaigning and advocating against, dispersals, homelessness, like failed immigration cases, etc. And I guess I'm just wondering, sort of, when you are a really small, under-resourced organisation, having more insight into how things work, like in Parliament than we do, are there actually some avenues that are more effective than others? Like, if we're trying to sort of create, micro campaigns or advocate for an issue, like obviously people say, get petitions, write to your MP, etc. But as organisations, are there just some democratic sort of, methods or techniques that you would deem better to use our time on than others?
Thank you. I think we'll take those two, and just for the interest of time and getting some more, if we could be, we'll do a second round afterwards, if that's okay. But if we could try and be brief, and then we'll try and get some more questions in. So first question, stop the boats, will it work? If I summarised it correctly.
I don't think it will work. Sunak is kind of running out of ideas on this one. And when an election campaign actually starts, whatever the government thinks the issue of the election is going to be, it doesn't necessarily work out like that. It certainly didn't for Theresa May in 2017, when the election became something much more about equality and poverty. And I would hope that the next election will turn into something more sensible about that and deal with the levels of inequality and poverty in Britain. But that, of course, requires the Labour leadership to actually say something useful about economic policy and the need for a different and fairer taxation system in this country, investment in social services, and all the other things that go with it. But we're not powerless in this. We can challenge, and we can challenge. And just because the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, the Sun, Sky News, GB News, etc., 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 say that the majority of people are solely concerned about the boats and nothing else, it's not necessarily the case. If you go out there with a human argument, a humane argument, one about decency, human rights, respect for people, there's an awful lot of people that will listen, will join in, and will take part. But you've got to go out there and make it. If you don't make the argument, nobody's going to be able to join in you. Your point about single issues, I fully understand. And I think the issue of unaccompanied child refugees that have now disappeared across Europe. I've been working with others on a report on this, the Council of Europe, on unaccompanied child minors around Europe, of which there are a very large number. The Convention on the Rights of the Child supersedes other legislation. It is a treaty, it is more powerful, and I see nothing wrong whatsoever in campaigning solely and push very hard on particular aspects of where the nastiness of the refugee and migrant policy leads to, which is children put in a very dangerous place, living in a very precarious existence and sometimes being grotesquely exploited. Expose it, because that is the product of the sheer nastiness of the rhetoric surrounding migrants and refugees in the first place.
We've got time for at least one more round of questions. Yep, so we've got one hand here. Yep, so just...
What was the most popular or favourite dish to cook?
We're going to keep that one.
Rice and peas.
Yeah, actually, if you go for that, and then we'll take another question.
anytime we had some kind of meet, that was always the most popular. And we'd always have to take at least 3 more volunteers on service to help with the demands. Rice, but good quality rice. I mean, if you sent out mushy rice, no, you were done. Like, nobody wanted to eat that. And yeah, lentils. That was the most popular, for sure.
And condiments.
And condiments,
Which,
yeah. Chili sauces,
Yeah.
loads of chili sauces, loads of different types of chili sauces as well. And sumac, especially for the Iranian and Kurdish and Iraqi populations, there was always this little girl who'd be like, because also they'd often pronounce it as smack. So you get these little kids going around, I want all the smack, and you're like, no. But yeah, sumac was a really, really popular condiment, so when we got it out, it was great.
Nice. I hope everyone's had dinner. More questions. We've got hand at the back, and then hand at the front. Maybe we could take both of them, so if I could start with someone at the front, just get some mics.
Yeah, it was actually just to go back on what the lady behind me said about the practical use for small local organisations. So this is for you in the middle, you smack dealer. Sort of practical from what kind of small organisation, who did he turn to for diplomatic advice and what will go through Parliament and what not? Because we're left, you will know, aren't you left kind of not knowing where legally you were bound, where you're going to get your money and support for, and what do you push forward through Parliament? It's not clear.
Thank you, and I think we had in the last row, person with a hand up there.
One of the touching things I felt about the film was how in the background you saw the humanity of the refugees and how appealing they were as characters and how potentially beneficial to society they would be. A man who stands there and says, well, if it doesn't work today, I go on again and again and again until I make it work. And those kinds of characteristics are actually core characteristics of a successful society. And when people see those facets of individuals, they actually want those people on their team. I think that was a real positive of the film and the way that you didn't labour it. And I think it ties in with what Jeremy said about changing opinions for the next election. How do we get those images of refugees into ordinary households so that people can start to change their view on them in the same way that I think, bizarrely, Big Brother did when all of a sudden it was the trans people and the freaks as opposed to the girl next door who was actually a bit of a whatever, who ended up winning in Big Brother because the editors actually showed the humanity of people we'd otherwise been told were freaks. And so you got winners who were outsiders on Big Brother. We need these people who will be valuable in our society to be shown to ordinary people how they could be useful to our community. How do we make that happen? Your film's great in that, but it's really long and most people aren't going to see it. So how can we... No, I loved it. I loved it, and I think it's long enough for everyone who's here. We're happy with the length of it, but most people don't watch documentaries of that length. And so, how do we get that kind of image of potential immigrants, refugees, as positive parts of our society out there, so that we can influence opinion? That's Tom. You've done a good job with that. What's your view on that? And does anyone else who's on there? You've written a book. I've forgotten your name. Who's written a book? You might have a view on how we can do that. That's my question.
Thank you very much. So we're going to have to be brief in our answers, but first question, sorry to summarise it, quite short, but another question about advice, support, networking for grassroots organisations, and then the second question really about depiction of and humanising stories of people with refugee backgrounds. Ellen, did you want to start on the first?
Yeah, so to be honest, it's really hard. It's also really difficult to be able to provide a service at the standard that you want it to and to be able to do any kind of advocacy. And in all fairness, that's why we have great organisations or great representatives like Calais Appeal who have the capacity and the energy to do that, which is it was always a really great thing because, again, grassroots organisations on the ground, it's just you finding the time to do it. with volunteers who don't necessarily, you know, with all the goodwill in the world, don't necessarily have the skill set or the experience either. But you know, with that, we've seen some incredible people and some incredible volunteers. I mean, actually, one of our amazing volunteers, Dara, is one of the reasons why Jeremy yourself came to Calais with Belle this year, and Dara herself just contacted as many MPs as she could. She started with her own, as a member of her own constituency, and then contacted as many MPs as possible to be able to get them to come and see what was happening. But yeah, the reality is it's really tough. It's difficult to navigate.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm not sure. Are there refugee characters on EastEnders? Should be, shouldn't there? And Big Brother, yeah, I mean, you had a good idea. I wasn't prepared for that question, but you're quite right. But I think there are lots of examples of kind of normalising, humanising. It does happen. It's just nothing's coming to mind right now. I'm sorry. But yeah, I'll keep making long, boring, serious movies. No,
I didn't hear the word boring. Gulwali, did you want a quick word maybe on this issue of depiction? Then I'm going to have to.
I think this idea of humanizing, I think somebody told me it's not humanizing, it's rehumanizing, because like this idea, although I agree with you, what you're saying, but we shouldn't be in a business where we get people to understand that I can contribute, I could have potential. You should welcome me because it's the right thing to do, because I'm playing war. Although I agree with you, you're absolutely right, the world that we're living in, because, you know, refugees have been dehumanized, we've been criminalized. I mean, you know, we've been campaigning on family reunification, we've been campaigning on ending detention, we've been campaigning allowing asylum seekers to work. None of the campaign have actually succeeded. In fact, it got worse than the government just recently announced raising if you bring your spouse. I brought my wife from Denmark. It was hard enough earning £19,000 and then had to pay £3,000 fees and had to pay £3,000 tax. And then now, if I want to bring my wife or if she wants to continue to live here, that's like almost 40 grand. So the government is they're so keen on making life difficult for people whose life is already difficult. Like, come on. They're not only targeting immigrants and refugees, they're targeting British nationals and British citizens. I mean, it's wrong to be targeting immigrants, but I mean, it's wrong in both sense. But like, they're like, oh, we're just anti-refugees, anti-immigrants. So I feel like the debate and discussion should be about not just, of course, you know, I have friends who came with me who are scientists, who are academics, who are doctors, who are teachers, who are actually, you will find them in the NHS serving people rather than being served. You will find them in schools rather than being, you know, in need of help, actually providing support. That's not the point. That will happen anyway. That will happen in any scenario. But the ultimate point is, we as a society, we need to think about our moral responsibilities and our legal obligation, and how do we welcome people from places like Afghanistan. As Jeremy said, how do we end conflict? So like, you know, the war in Gaza, in Yemen or Afghanistan was not happening. I wouldn't be a refugee. If I have a choice, I want to be with my family, I want to be with my loved ones. So we need to find ways to help people where they are. But when they come here, we need to show solidarity and treat them as a fellow human beings, not dehumanizing this idea that we need to send people 6,000 miles away because we don't want you to be here, we see you as a threat, we want to use you as a deterrence. I've been hearing this argument of deterrence in detention and deportation for the last 15, 16 years of my life, and it hasn't worked, it wouldn't work, and it's cruel, it's wrong, and we need to make a stand. It's depressing, like we have the Nationalities and Borders Act, we have the Illegal Migration Act, now we have this emergency legislation going through. Literally, the government has spent so much time and energy on an issue which is not even an issue.
Yes.
So, yeah. I'm going to give Jeremy a quick opportunity to speak on this, and then
very, very quickly, the Illegal Migration Act and the subsequent emergency legislation is in Parliament at the moment. It's with the House of Lords, and the House of Lords is full of lawyers, even more full of lawyers than the House of Commons, and so there may be some more mildly beneficial changes coming on it, although I don't suspect there's going to be any massive change. And so surely for us the issue is empathy, solidarity, understanding and promotion of the achievements of migrants and refugees within our society. So don't always present every refugee and every migrant as a victim. Yes, they are victims. Obviously, there wouldn't be that in the first place. But also, people don't want to spend their lives as victims. They want to be able to achieve and be recognised for their achievements. And so I think it is about saying, okay, this person came here as a refugee, they're now a senior surgeon somewhere, they're a lawyer somewhere, they're an engineer, whatever, or contributing to their community. Human stories work. This nonsense of now £38,000 income before you can bring a partner into this country is incredibly discriminatory for very obvious reasons. But I noticed even on the most populist websites that pop up on my computer because there's some algorithm decided I really want to read the Daily Express. God knows who invented this algorithm that's linked me to the Daily Express, but it has. There's a story right there today about a couple in Scotland who have been working towards getting citizenship. One of them is from abroad, one is from Scotland. They don't earn anywhere near 38,000. I think they earn about 24,000 a year, which is, I guess, probably an average sort of wage from the area that I saw they were living in at the present time. So they're left with a terrible, terrible human dilemma. There's one half of the partnership, go back, live or try and survive, or whatever. Well, that's a human story, and that's the kind of story that can take off because it's human empathy. When you've got people's human empathy around the way people are treated, you begin to win on the bigger and wider arguments. But stand up for human rights and stand up for humanity. Never shy away from it.
Well, thank you so much for coming. As you know, tonight was a fundraiser for Calais Appeals, so all of the money, all of it, everything directly, and there's merchandise being sold, is going towards supporting organisations working across northern France. So thank you for being here.
Please be generous.
Yeah, we're taking donations. There's a donation box. If you want to get this film into hands, screens of more people, Tom's film, On Our Doorstep, is available on Curzon Home Cinema until May. And if you want to spread the word and get more people listening to these stories, please write reviews, talk to people about it, put it on things like Letterboxd, which I'm not familiar with, but apparently it's really good. But that stuff makes a difference. A lot of it's algorithms, which really helps get the word out. So just last thing for me to say is thank you so much to Tom for making the film, bringing it here this evening for this fundraiser. Thank you to Jeremy, Ellen, and Gulwali for joining me today.
Thank you.